Welcome to the brand new Zach Lowe Show. That's right, I'm back to have the same in-depth NBA conversations you're used to. We're going to talk about the games, the X's and O's, the drama. The playoffs are coming up. And now you get to see every episode in full on video on Spotify and on my own YouTube channel. Episodes drop every Monday and Thursday with a collection of guests you're going to love. So make sure you follow and subscribe to the brand new Zach Lowe Show on Spotify or wherever you watch or listen to your podcasts. Let's go!
Welcome to the Ringer NFL show. Sheil Kapadia here with Steven Ruiz and Diante Lee. We're doing some draft leftovers today. Some stuff that's happened maybe since the end of the draft, some headlines that have been made on Monday, maybe some teams that we haven't really talked about when we did all our shows on Thursday and Saturday. So check those out if you haven't checked those out yet. Ruiz, how are we doing in the post-draft glow?
We're living life. I've been to the gym like 2 days in a row.
All right.
I'm ungupping. I'm recovering after the season. People like to think that the season ends with the Super Bowl, but not for us. Not for us in the content game. The season just ended on Saturday.
That's right. Diante, now it's when you go like dentist appointment, oil change, all the things.
Talk to your loved ones and your family.
Reintroduce yourself to your family, all those things. This is a good time for that.
I try to orient my entire year around late April to late June to kind of do all those housekeeping things. Like my registration comes up for my car. Yes. I usually reset my diet around this time of year. Like you said, if there's any traveling that we've been putting off, if I need to, re-up my SeaWorld and San Diego Zoo yearly subscription memberships, all that stuff is happening over the next couple of months. It's definitely time to kind of palate cleanse and take a break from football for as much as we love talking about it.
There's that meme on Twitter where it's Goofy or something looking at he's in a room with a girl version of Goofy. And he's like, you live like this? That's how the off-season version of me would look at the in-season version of me.
Yes, there's no doubt about it. We're not complaining. We love our jobs. It's football. Many of you listening are probably like, we have much harder to, we understand. But it's just, it's a little peek into the football content space. Yeah, if there's any weird diet fad thing this time of year, I'm like, oh, let me have it. You only eat for 3 hours a day, but you eat as much as you can. Okay, yeah, let me try that. Then I quit in a week, and then I'm like, oh, training camp's almost here. Back to normal. So that's usually how this time of year goes. But some fun headlines this morning. And maybe none more fun than Brandon Beane just woke up angry and said, I'm tired of it. I'm tired of losing to the Chiefs. I'm tired of not getting over the hump. And someone's going to feel it today. So for those of you who missed it, Buffalo Bills GM Brandon Beane was waiting on hold. Presumably, this is what happens when you do a radio hit. Oftentimes, when you're on the phone, you're listening to the show until you go on. So I'm assuming that's what happened to him. And he wasn't just listening to the show naturally, but he was on WGR radio in Buffalo. And I guess he heard the Jeremy and Joe show talking about how the Bills did not draft a wide receiver early. And boy, Brandon Beane took issue with that. Just beginning, anyone in the content space, this is a good lesson. You don't start out by saying hey, how's it going? You just come in hot and you just get to your points right away. And that's what Brandon Beane did, pointing out that the Bills scored 30 points in 8 straight games last year, pointing out that the Bills led the league in points scored, pointing out that they needed to get better on defense. And so he said, quote, bitching about wide receiver is one of the dumbest arguments I've ever heard. I mean, the man started his radio hit with that. So I love it. I think we need more of that little GM media back and forth. But it reminded me that, hey, we haven't even talked about the Bills draft here. And this is a team that obviously is a Super Bowl contender pretty much every year. Diante, when you saw these comments or heard these comments, what did you think? Is Brandon Beane right? And then we can obviously talk about what they did in the draft here.
I I don't know if I even want to position it as right versus wrong, right? Like, to me, the wide receiver conversation in the NFL is a lot like the 3-and-D wing conversation in the NBA, where we all just talk about like, oh, this team just needs 1 or 2 more 3-and-D wings in their rotation and they might be ready to contend. Yeah, the problem with that is that you have to find guys that are good enough to merit playing 34 to 36 minutes a night. The same thing exists in football. It's easy to say, oh, you look at contract value versus where guys are drafted, how often they touch the ball, what their second contracts go for. If you find a guy that hits, and it makes all the sense in the world analytically to approach the draft with, if there's a wide receiver available that you think is good enough, you should take him. The issue with that is specific to Buffalo. Look at where they draft. Look at the guys who are drafted after they make their selection, and then judge it against their depth chart, right? You don't just get to put this in a vacuum and say, Luther Burden went after you drafted. You could have got Luther Burden. Where are you putting Luther Burden in this offense that's not going to negatively affect Khalil Shakir?
Yeah.
You guys have done the big wide receiver thing. Would you have liked for him to try to get Trey Harris, who might be kind of like square peg, round hole if you think about the way that they play offense in Buffalo now, and they already have Keon Coleman as your big body, physical, ball-winning wide receiver.
And Josh Palmer.
And Josh Palmer, who they just signed this offseason. You have 2 tight ends. One of these guys you would like, I think, for Dalton Kincaid to show a little bit more, to be able to take on more of a high volume workload within the offense. They've done the work to try to add to this wide receiver core. When you're drafting after 26th every year, I don't know what you're supposed to find in terms of wide receiver 1. And they had to let go of the wide receiver 1 they had because it would have been cost prohibitive for the way they want to build this roster. So I'm with Brandon Beane from that respect. And I think especially with how easy it is to forget what eliminated this team in the postseason. They did not have an offense problem in the postseason.
Yes.
They blew the doors off of Denver. They were able to move the ball against Baltimore's even on the ground and through the air in bad weather conditions. They moved the ball just fine in the AFC Championship game. They lost that game because every time Patrick Mahomes touched the ball, he marched it down the field. And then he was able to wind the clock in the second half when Kansas City wanted to just sit on it. They needed to address that. And I think if you look at their draft through that lens of trying to address the reason why you didn't get to the Super Bowl, I would say that they came as close as you could based on where they're drafting to addressing those problems. So I don't understand why we would still be on the point of talking about what they're missing on offense after the year they just had.
Yeah, and just to add to it, like, look at the structure of the offense, too, where you don't necessarily have 3 wide receivers on the field at all times. Like, we celebrated their offense because they did the opposite of that, and they took more off of Josh Allen's plate. And it sounds like you're yearning for an offense that puts even more on his plate. Like, oh, let's spread it out and run quick game and run put it on him to read out the defense and read out the coverage. Like, that's not what this offense was last year. It was on first down, we're going to get under center, we're going to run the ball, or we're going to play action. And I don't think you need a bunch of wide receivers to run that. I feel like sometimes we look at these offenses as if they're all operating with the same system and with the same needs. Like, yes, like a team that runs 11 personnel with 3 wide receivers on the field 80% of the time, they should be drafting wide receivers every year. They should be trying to replenish their wide receiver room. One that's built around like big bodies, tight ends, extra offensive linemen, and all that. They shouldn't necessarily be prioritizing wide receiver, because if you do that while you're running this offense, then that's how your defense kind of decays. And that's how you lose talent on defense. And you stop using draft capital on defense. I think this was the smart draft. I like their approach. I like doubling up at corner. I like doubling up at defensive tackle. My one concern is they took 2 defensive tackles that I would say need some developmental work.
Yeah.
And that's been an issue in Buffalo. They've spent a lot of draft capital on the defensive line in particular. And they haven't really gotten, they have gotten some talent out of this. Like Greg Rousseau has been a good player, but they haven't gotten what I think they expected when they used those picks on those guys.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think when we did we talked about Brandon Beane going through the AFC GMs. It's exactly what you said, Ruiz. It's like they have good players. They don't have the game-wrecking player where you're like, man, we got a game plan for this guy. And they also don't have the unit that you're like, man, this unit can take over the game. It's just like, pretty good player. He's a pretty good player. But to Diante's point, just a reminder that in that playoff loss to the Chiefs, that was an 87th percentile game on offense for the Bills and a 13th percentile game on defense for the Bills. The year before, in the playoff loss to the Chiefs, a 96th percentile game on offense and an 11th percentile game on defense. I mean, you usually don't see these stark differences in like a 1-game sample, but the last 2 times they have been eliminated from the playoffs, and it was even before then. Remember that Bengals game? Their defense got lit up at home. So this has been an ongoing issue. They get rid of Leslie Frazier. Sean McDermott takes over. They try the big move with Von Miller. They try to use the draft this offseason. They tried Joey Bosa. They drafted Kyer Elam. That didn't work.
Yep.
You can't just quit. You got to keep, all right, you have identified the biggest issue on the team, and that is that the defense, when it goes up against these high-powered offenses, or high-powered might be, too complimentary. When you go up against some really good quarterbacks, I should say, in the playoffs, they haven't been able to get stops. And if they would have been able to put together just sort of league average performances in any one of those games, we might be talking about a team that has already reached the Super Bowl. So yeah, their draft here made sense to me. They made 9 picks, 6 on defense, including their first 5 picks were all on defense. And if a wide receiver fell to them and they said, we love this guy, best available player, I would have said, go for it. You can draft over Joshua Palmer. There's no issue there. But the way this draft set up, there wasn't a spot where I was like, why did they draft this guy over a wide receiver? So Diante, their first 3 picks, they take Kentucky corner Maxwell Hairston at 30. They trade up for South Carolina defensive tackle TJ Sanders at 41. And they take Arkansas edge defender Landon Jackson at 72. Those were their picks on the first 2 days of the draft. What did you think of kind of those 3 prospects, how they fit in, how likely they are to give the defense a boost here?
Each one of those guys, I think, address a specific need within the defense, right? Like having Max Hairston now allows you to match speed for speed when you're playing against a Kansas City, right? I think that having a TJ Sanders, and he does need some time, but that gives you a guy, even though it's kind of interesting trying to judge he and Deone Walker's skill sets up against Ed Oliver. Like I do think it's duplicative in some points and then kind of doesn't address some like run stuffing needs that you might need on the interior. But I like both of those guys because of what they can give you as defensive tackles. And then Landon Jackson, I think, especially where you got him at 72, knowing that the edge market in the draft was kind of all over the place, for that guy to fall out of the top 50 and you to be able to get him in the 3rd round, I thought was great value. That was somebody who was talked at anywhere from a fringe first rounder to a surefire day 2 guy, and you got him at 72. I don't know what his ceiling is, right? But if you just look at the productivity, you look at the polish that he's going to bring to the position, I think that's the right kind of dice roll to take in the 3rd round. And I like the fact that they didn't reach for a player like that in the first, right? They went and got on their board who was the best athlete defensively that we could bring in at the spot we're drafting. And that was Hairston at that time. And even though they have not necessarily landed on an elite player, I think that what they're trying to do, the needle they're trying to thread, is maybe the hardest in sports, which is when you're good, but not great, or great, but not elite. And that is the hardest tier jump to land. Yeah. And a lot of times that kind of falls upon a player having traits that he can access that are rare, right? And I know that for me as an Eagles fan, and this, Sheil, being in Philadelphia, that's something that the Eagles are often talking about as a playoff team. One of the reasons why they draft for traits all the time is because you're drafting on the back half of the first round. You need to go get guys that have elite physical abilities and hope that you have a coaching staff that can harness them and get the most out of them. I think that we just have to wait and see. Like it's an unsexy answer. I think that sometimes it's unsatisfactory for fans when you haven't gotten over that hump. And I understand the insecurity of looking at this window and trying to figure out how open it is because of how competitive the AFC is at the top. But Buffalo handles their drafts the way that they're supposed to. I don't think that they've left an offseason over the last 4 years not taking a swing that was necessary. It's just going to be on the player to make it happen. And we won't know until December of 2025.
Yeah, these guys, I mean, the process with these players makes sense, but it doesn't mean they're going to hit. I mean, Maxwell Hairston's 183 pounds. Does he have the play strength to hold up? To Ruiz's point, is Sanders going to make an impact right away? Why did 71 times Landon Jackson was passed over when it seems like he's a big defensive end who plays with a lot of effort. So you never know, but I think that they are worthy swings to take. I think it made sense. I think they're a Super Bowl contender once again. And I like that, normally after the draft is when personnel people are at their happiest. Like they think they nailed it most of the time, where they're like, oh my gosh, we got 7 starters in this draft. This is going to be amazing. And they think they had a great weekend. So I like it. And to be fair, I didn't listen to exactly what, the host said before. They might have been innocuous comments, and Beane just came out here.
Came in hot.
I'm lighting you up anyway. And that's good, Brandon Beane, because we needed some content post-draft on this Monday morning.
All I got to say is I recognize a podcaster when I see one. Brandon Beane.
Listen.
That was a podcast, right? I've been there before. We've all been there before.
Yeah, if you want to come on here and yell at us, Brandon Beane, we are very available. Let me say that. So just let us know. All right, let's take a break. We come back, and I like being able to say this. We're talking about a team we didn't talk about during the draft, the weekend pods, the Dallas Cowboys. We are a hipster pod. All right, we'll be back and talk about Dallas. All right, we are back on the Ringer NFL show. Cowboys did not land a wide receiver. That is the headline in some areas of the internet here with the Dallas Cowboys. They did make 9 picks. They took Alabama guard Tyler Booker at 12. They took Boston College edge Donovan Ezaraku at 44, and they took East Carolina cornerback Siobhan Revel Jr. at 76. I thought those were 3 pretty good picks. That made sense to me. They've got 4 offensive linemen now on rookie contracts in front of Dak Prescott. However, wide receiver 2 is still an issue, more so for the Cowboys than the Bills. When you look at depth, the Cowboys obviously have CeeDee Lamb, but behind CeeDee Lamb, they do not have a number 2. Now, Ruiz, Jerry Jones made an interesting comment, which I missed before the draft, but I caught up on today, where he said, told reporters that they were considering 2, quote, pretty substantive trades before the draft. I think in regards to wide receiver. What did you make of that comment? What do you make of the Cowboys wide receiver depth chart and kind of where they stand here post-draft?
The depth chart, I'll start with the depth chart because it's not good. And I don't think it's good enough. We just talked in the last segment about how the Bills' offense is structured. Well, the Cowboys' offense is structured in a different way, where they have 3 wide receivers on the field, a bunch. I think they were 9th in terms of percentage of having 3 wide receivers on the field on offense. So this is a glaring need, and I think it's one that they need to address. But I think Jerry, like you said, has been looking for other avenues besides the draft, which I think is honestly a smart approach. I don't think you should just draft for need just because. And I think Stephen Jones said something to that effect after the draft. He was basically saying the board didn't work out that way. We didn't want to reach. We wanted to take the best player available. And that's ultimately what they did. They did have a very good draft. Like just based on the names alone and like the value and the consensus board, I think they had an above average draft. But then Jerry said afterwards that the train has not left the station in regards to improving the wide receiver room if they have to, which I definitely think they have to. And there are available guys out there. There are moves to be made. So I wouldn't be hitting the panic button just yet. But if we get to August and they haven't made a move yet and they haven't followed up on Jerry's comments, then I would be hitting the panic button.
I was trying to come up with names, Diante, about who he could be talking about. And the only one that immediately came to mind was George Pickens. His name has been out there. That would just skill set wise, that would be a nice compliment, I think, to CeeDee Lamb. Does something different on the outside, ball winner, whereas CeeDee Lamb can win from the slot, can win in different ways. That to me would be a pretty interesting trade. I mean, Ruiz, you said you don't love the depth chart. I agree it's a glaring hole at wide receiver. I sort of feel like they're one trade away though from me being like, this looks like, I don't know, this looks like a playoff roster to me. But you're right. At this point in time, they haven't addressed their biggest need. Diante, what do you think about that? Pickens, somebody else? How do you feel about this team post-draft?
I mean, frankly, if George Pickens is the answer, I feel like we're creating more questions than we are creating solutions. But that's really just speaking to all that comes with, ostensibly with dealing with George Pickens. As a player, if you dropped him into this mix, and I think for Dallas specifically, prioritizing a known commodity, so to speak. Again, we're talking about George Pickens here. So what we know of him as a commodity is kind of complicated, but as a known commodity on the field, a ball winner, a field stretcher type at times, somebody who can be a bully X and allow CeeDee Lamb to really work specifically from the slot. I like that a lot for Dallas. And I would much rather do that if I have a $60 million quarterback than hoping like a Jaden Higgins or Jalen Noel in the middle rounds are able to step right in and be impact players, or getting like a Luther Burden. And now I've got to figure out how often is he playing on the inside versus playing in on the perimeter. Same thing with Matthew Golden, right? I think that there are guys that could have complimented CD, and that's a compliment to CD, right? That's a credit to CD as a receiver because he's so versatile. But none of those guys are really like math changers for Dallas's offense. Yeah. I do think, like Steven said, it is a pretty glaring hole, right? If we're trying to talk about this team as a contender, I would say, at least in the NFC, there's really only one or two teams that have a worse wide receiver depth chart, especially when you get past number one, than Dallas. And you can make an argument that they'd be at the bottom when you start judging name for name outside of CeeDee Lamb. But I do like the fact that he was forthcoming about, we're still looking, we're still in the market. And if you're able to get a veteran that's as talented as a George Pickens, I could quickly see them bringing him in and that changing the way that I look at this offense and really this team in general.
It's like over the last couple of years, at least, the one position where if you wanted to go into the trade market to get a guy that can actually change things for your offense, it's been wide receiver.
It is that receiver, yeah.
Like, teams have done that multiple times over the last couple of years. But I do think like Diante brought up a good point about CeeDee Lamb, like not being overstretched. Because I feel like last year he kind of was. It was the first time in a couple of years where he played more on the outside than he did in the slot. It's the first time over 50%. Where his routes were outside. So I think that speaks to it. Like, they realized they needed someone on the outside who can kind of just threaten the defense in any way, shape, or form. And that took away from what CeeDee Lamb does best. If you could find just a guy, whether it's Pickens or another guy who could just win vertically, that can allow CD to be CD, then I think it's not just like you're adding a player, but it's almost like you're adding like an extra player because you're getting the best out of CeeDee Lamb.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's both complementary and then depth too. I mean, they are like a CeeDee Lamb injury away from it's a disaster. I mean, it's a complete disaster. If he's out for a month or something, I don't know who you're throwing to the football to. I mean, Jalen Tolbert, Jonathan Mingo.
Well, let me throw an alternative at you, because we talked about this team during the draft.
Yeah.
What if you start calling Green Bay and asking, like, hey, you guys drafted a bunch of guys. That.
Yeah.
Right? It might not have to be. Christian Watson's got injury concerns, so I don't even know how you put together a trade package that makes Green Bay happy with giving away maybe their most explosive option and you, as Dallas, acquiring that player. But what if it's like Dontavian Wicks, who is a guy who has some outside versatility, not a dominant player, but somebody who can give you just another guy to throw to? It doesn't just have to be Pickens, right? Like, you can take a varied approach, I think, to addressing this position. And it does not have to be a guy who has legitimate X number one receiver potential, I think, to make this make sense. They just need a guy to bounce off of CD and a guy that can play outside comfortably, like Steven said, so that way CD can play from the slot.
To your point, 2 years ago, we got a near MVP season out of Dak Prescott with Brandon Cooks as his wide receiver too. If that's the bar, like, that's a very easy bar to clear. Especially at this position, like we said, there are multiple guys available. Like, the Packers have guys that are probably available. They haven't come out and said it, but based on their moves, they're available. George Pickens seems available. It seems like the Steelers don't want any part of that headache.
Yeah.
And I feel like wide receivers just come onto the market out of nowhere in this league. So I'm not totally worried about that. It's April 28th. I mean, talk to me on August 28th.
Yeah, I'm trying to look and see if there's anybody.
$37 million in cap space. Do you call Miami?
Dude, I just brought up the standings, and as anyone who pulls up the standings knows, the first group is the AFC East, and I looked at Miami and was like, do I bring this up or not? I don't know. Do you?
That's what I'm saying about That's what I'm saying about Dallas, right? Like, they're not constrained. I think it's easy to look at the depth chart and identify an immediate need. I don't think they have to make any one move, right? And that's where I think they actually have a little bit more negotiating power going into this if they're trying to make a deal than being stuck just dealing with the Pittsburgh because you know there's a guy on the market and you have an obvious need. If I'm Jerry Jones, if I'm Stephen Jones, I'm calling Miami. Maybe I can get him for a day 2 pick.
Yeah, I would call him too, but like, it's hard to, you also have to ignore Tyreek had another off-field incident this offseason, and I feel like that's the tough part with Tyreek. Tyreek in a vacuum, sure. Like, yeah, that would be the perfect fit for what they need right now. But when you're thinking about all this baggage, like, I wouldn't want him personally. I don't know if Jerry would have that same calculation. I feel like they take
moves. I mean, they take care. They take guys like Hardy that every year in the draft. Yeah.
Yep.
So it's an interesting one. Tyreek Hill, George Pickens, maybe some names to keep an eye on for the Dallas Cowboys here. I'm looking at these playoff odds, though. I just pulled up FanDuel. The Cowboys are plus 210 to make the playoffs. I mean, teams with better odds to make the playoffs than the Cowboys, the Patriots, the Seahawks, the Colts, the Bears, the Steelers, the Jaguars, the Cardinals, the Falcons, the Dolphins. That seems crazy to me.
You're a little higher on them than I would have expected. Well, let me name the teams that had a worse point differential than them in the NFC last year. The Giants and the Panthers, end of list.
Okay, but Dak Prescott played 8 games. What are we talking about?
He got hurt in week 9. Go back to week 9 and look at point differential.
They were 3-5 when he got hurt. They're 76-46. They're 30 games over 500 when Dak Prescott is their starter for his career. That's over different coaches, different supporting casts, different offensive lines. I mean, they won 12 games in a row, 3 years in a row before last year. And I don't look at the roster now and I'm like, that's in a different stratosphere than it was during those 3 years. I mean, I would agree it's worse. I don't know that it's like,
I think it is. I think it's worse.
They can't win 9 or 10 games, this team?
9 or 10. Yeah, we're not.
That's playoff. That's playoffs.
They won 7 last year. That's not much of an improvement.
That's what I'm saying. So that's why I'm saying plus 210 with all those teams ahead of them.
Offensive line worse. Crazy. Defensive line worse. Well, linebacker group probably the same, but still bad. Like, I feel like this is a very flawed team across the board.
It is a flawed team.
I do think this is a team that will probably be banking on regression. To me, that's the issue with Dallas. It's not like, trying to find their win total, because I think that they'll perpetually be between 7 and 10 throughout Dak's career. I think it's more like, do you believe that Washington will regress? Do you believe Minnesota will regress? And now you can kind of sneak in. Do you believe Tampa Bay will regress and you can sneak in as a 6 or 7 seed? That to me is a bigger conversation.
Yeah, maybe my standards for the Cowboys are just higher than Sheil's, because he's talking about 9 wins. Like 9 wins, like, that doesn't move the needle in Dallas.
Well, I brought up the playoff odds. That's what I'm saying. To make the playoffs, it's plus 210. That's what their over under for wins is 7.5.
They should be able to clear that.
They should be able to
put some lettuce on it, Sheil. Put some lettuce on it.
That's crazy. Hold on. Pause the podcast. Let me sign into my FanDuel. I can't. Usually the Cowboys are inflated for everything. I don't know. Right. Do people think Mike McCarthy was a good coach or something? I think that's at the heart of my argument. Is like, are we sure Mike McCarthy to Brian Schottenheimer is really like a difference-making head coach?
I'm not sure if Mike McCarthy's a good coach, but I'm positive that Brian Schottenheimer
is not.
I don't know. I might put him in a similar tier. That's probably unfair. I know Mike McCarthy has won a Super Bowl. And won a lot of. So what? 12 no one wants him as the head coach right now.
Who cares?
I don't care about that Super Bowl. Who cares?
That's my kind of
time ago.
That's my kind of take. Who cares if you won a Super Bowl?
All right, that's the Dallas Cow 7.5. Sheesh, I can't believe how am I finding myself on this corner defending the Dallas Cowboys on April 28th? Unbelievable. How did we get here?
This is what we were doing during the regular season. We're getting you to defend quarterbacks that you didn't want to defend.
All right. Next one here. Another team I might defend, to be quite honest, the San Francisco 49ers going against the grain. That's the next headline. We didn't talk about them on Thursday or Saturday. So Ruiz mentioned the consensus boards. And for those who don't know, a lot of people out there do great work with the consensus boards. Arif Hassan is the first person I remember doing them. Benjamin Robinson at Grinding the Mocks. Jack Lichtenstein. Just want to give those people the shout outs because they're doing the work. And the idea is that you take a bunch of the pre-draft rankings. It could be hundreds that are publicly available on the internet. You combine them in sort of a wisdom of crowds approach, and you come up with a consensus 100. And a lot of the work that these guys and other people have done shows that, like, the average NFL team, there's not much of a difference in their draft performance with all the resources they have and a consensus board that's publicly available. In other words, if you just took this board and did nothing else with scouting or analytics or anything else and just said, we're going to draft by this, you might be able to replicate an average NFL team. So it's always fun to look at these and say, all right, which teams reached the most when you just look at the publicly available stuff and which teams were most in line with what kind of people thought about these prospects. And again, that brings us to the San Francisco 49ers, who went against the grain with more reaches than any other team in the NFL in this draft. According to Benjamin Robinson's site, Grinding the Mocks, over half of the 49ers picks were considered reaches when going up against the consensus board. Their biggest reach was Western Kentucky cornerback Upton Stout at 100. They drafted him in the third round with the 100th overall pick. Now, the 49ers also took Georgia edge Mykel Williams at 11. They took Texas defensive tackle Alfred Collins at 43. They took Oklahoma State linebacker Nick Martin at 75. So those were some of their other top 100 picks. They went heavy on defense. First 5 picks they used were on defense. Ruiz, you look at the 49ers, what they did in the draft, the consensus board stuff. How do you kind of feel about what they did over the weekend and where they stand here?
I mean, the approach makes a lot of sense. Like, I like the approach of being like, okay, our defensive line, when we were at our best defensively, it was because of our defensive line, and it fell off over the last couple of years. We haven't been able to stop the run at all, and that we haven't been able to rush the passer because you can't stop the run, you can't rush the passer. So taking 4 out of your first 5 selections are on the defensive line, like that makes sense to me. Not addressing the offense, even I think people have taken issue with them not addressing the offensive line, which I think makes sense. But the defense really needed to be addressed. And the offense, they got killed by injuries, 31st in adjusted games lost last year on offense. And they still ranked 10th. Like, I think you could just leave the offense alone, hope for some positive regression, hope for some better injury luck, and you're going to be a top 5 offense. You're going to be at least in the top 10. But they needed to address this defense. So I like that approach. I don't like the approach of reaching, especially with this organization, which has had a habit of reaching, and it rarely, if ever, works out, especially on the offensive side. I don't know. Maybe it's going to be different on the defensive side because you don't have Kyle Shanahan pounding the table for a day 3 running back on day 2. But the track record is what gives me pause. But I do like the approach.
What'd you think, Diante?
I would say, as far as like the decision making, it doesn't surprise me. Like Steven said, you can go over their draft history outside of day 1. They've always kind of been our guy over the consensus board drafting team, right? They're always looking for, I think, very hyper specific fits for what it is that they're looking for. It's very like Belichickian in that regard, right? So, and that's why I think you can come out of drafts feeling a little underwhelmed with what they do on day 2 and day 3. I think that as far as the approach this year, I think that handing the keys over to the defense from a draft perspective makes a lot of sense. I think Nick Martin was a reach. I don't know if he needed to be the 75th pick, especially when you look at the way that they use linebackers. I feel like that's more of maybe Robert Saleh just saying he wants a linebacker, and that guy might end up just being a special teamer. I don't know if he has a highest ceiling. But the top 2 picks, Mykel Williams and Alfred Collins, you got a run-stuffing defensive tackle, and they were awful up the spine last year trying to stop the run, and they were hurt often on the defensive interior. So they have big-time issues. I think bringing in Alfred Collins addresses that. And in terms of Mykel Williams, I've said this basically for as long as we've been talking about the draft. If you're talking about physical traits and high ceilings, there isn't a guy with a better argument than Mykel Williams.
Totally agree.
Being productive through an injury. Right. Yeah. And the flashes that we've seen look like potential elite defensive line play. So I like those 2 picks. I think everything after that, you just kind of have to hold your nose and hope that Kyle Shanahan and Robert Saleh just know what they're doing with identifying players. And I will say that defensively, I feel like they usually find guys that can work between like the 3rd and 5th rounds more often than they do on O. So I'm willing to give them a little bit of benefit of doubt. It's just where I'm looking at the pick number versus the name that they got. There's a lot that's kind of got me shaking my head and raising my eyebrows.
It felt like Robert Saleh had more influence over this draft than maybe defensive coordinators for the 49ers have had. But like, I don't know if that's necessarily a bad approach. I don't know if it's a good approach either, but they did find the core of their defense when Saleh was there, which I assume they were asking him for his input back then. And maybe they're like, oh, well, it worked back then, it's going to work now. That's not always the case. That doesn't always work out. But yeah, the Mykel Williams pick, I think that's the jewel of the class. Obviously, is the first overall pick, but that's the one where I'm like, yes, thumbs up across the board. Like I have no qualms about that pick because at the very least, he's going to help you in the run game. I think just based on his physical attributes, he's going to be able to do that, kind of like a Travon Walker situation where he hasn't become like this like pass rush artist, but he has given you good football. So I think that's a very high floor pick for them.
I totally agree on Michael Williams. I mean, I got a little surprised to look at that they were so far off consensus. And I know, so some of those were later round picks, which it's like, I don't know that I care that much in the 6th round if you're reaching for a guy versus an undrafted free agent. I mean, I thought of like all the first round picks, Michael Williams was one of the one that made the most sense to me. I was just like, that's a nice to Diante, to your point, in this draft specifically for a guy who's going to be 21 years old as a rookie with those traits, with that size. It doesn't mean it's going to work, but I'm like, yeah, I would have easily talked myself into Michael Williams in the top 15. And to Ruiz's point, I agree with the theme. It's like, let's get back to kind of what we were on defense back in the day, what our roots were, where we are going to get home with this front four. They're going to be tough to deal with. And they didn't really get away from that personnel wise. They just had some moves that didn't work out, and that happened. So I thought Michael Williams made sense. Alfred Collins, like one of the biggest men in the entire draft, a massive human being, to your point, that can help against the run also. So I thought I kind of like those 2 picks. I like, investing in the defense, not necessarily because that's exactly what you want to do, but if the draft falls that way, I don't have an issue with investing in the defense early. We saw the floor, I think, of that offense last year with all those injuries, and it wasn't a train wreck. I mean, there are teams in the NFL that would kill for like some of the numbers the Niners put up offensively last year. So yeah, I'm not as down on it. You look at some of their picks over the years, and we did this when we went over the NFC GMs. They've been a disaster in the first round. I mean, really, maybe the biggest disaster in the first round when you look at the capital they've invested and what they've gotten out of players. But they've had some big time hits in the later rounds. I mean, you can just go through George Kittle in the 5th here one year, DJ Reed in the 5th the next year, Fred Warner in the 3rd, Dre Greenlaw in the 5th, Jawan Jennings in the 7th, Hufanga in the 5th, Lenore in the 5th. Like, they have found starting caliber players in the later rounds of the drafts here. So yeah, I'm not going to kill him. I'm not going to kill him for the consensus board. You are the losers of this draft necessarily. It doesn't mean it's going to work out, but yeah, I don't go overboard with the Niners. I think early on the picks made sense. Maybe if you want to take issue, I can't tell you. I grinded the Upton Stout film, so I don't know whether that was a good pick or not at 100 overall. But then, like I said, day 3, it's just like, I don't know. No one's mastered day 3. It's not like there's a team out there. It's like their method for day 3 crushes it all the time. Right. So if they want to go on their own a little bit with those picks, I'm okay with that.
Who did grind the Upton Stout, Phil? Like, am I supposed to believe that these people that put
John
together
Lynch and Kyle Shannon and Robert Saleh?
I don't think the people that put together these big boards across the internet, like I think it's a valuable tool. And I think it's more valuable on day 1 than it is on day 2 and 3 and 4 because
it's valuable for like a Cole Strange pick, right?
Yeah. Internet analysts, we don't have access to like the background information on these day 2 and day 3 picks. We have it for day 1 picks just because it's publicly, like, it's out there. We knew all about Shadeur Sanders' interviews. We probably didn't hear about Upton Stout's interviews and how those went. So
medical, all that stuff.
I'll give the 49ers front office the benefit of the doubt over like draftdickheads.com or something. I don't know wherever they're pulling these big boards from.
I'm not putting that into my work computer, Diante. You should not either. Let's take Ruiz's word that draftdickheads.com is not a credible resource, and I will not be adding it to the rotation this year.
I'm on my personal computer, so I'm going to go to it. See if anything comes up.
All right, we're going to take a break. When Ruiz comes back, he'll tell us if anything came up for draftdickheads.com, and we'll get to a couple other storylines. All right, we're back on the Ringer NFL show. Ruiz, anything?
No. Open URL. So anyone who wants it, it's out there.
Open URL. Now's the time. Free content ideas also from the Ringer NFL show. All right. This next one, I just had to add because we have a new character in our lives, and this is always fun for me. His name is James Gladstone. And 2 weeks ago, knew almost nothing about the guy, except some people made the comparison that he looks a little bit like our friend Ben Solak. Other than that, I knew he worked for the Rams. I knew he worked with Les Snead. And then the last 2 weeks, I read a very good Jordan Rodriguez profile that introduced me to James Gladstone a little bit. But maybe more importantly, I have just been devouring any James Gladstone press conference clip I can get my hands on here in the last 3 days. The guy has a level that I didn't know he could get to. It's unexpected. The delivery, the tone, the personality. We'll discuss whether I'm buying it or not. But for those who missed this, we wanted to play for you a clip from James Gladstone when he was introducing Travis Hunter, and then we're going to talk about him.
Yeah, as we sit here, Travis Hunter is a Jacksonville Jaguar, and really what comes to mind for me, right? Thinking about the sport of football and really the power of the game itself, right? Its capacity to ignite belief, right? Belief in ourselves, belief in others, right? Belief in achieving what many may deem impossible. Travis Hunter, he embodies belief, right? He's a rare person. He's a rare player, but he's also a reminder that the boundaries of the game of football were built to be challenged. And so the decision to select him was actually a statement for how we plan to move, who we are, and we want him to be nothing more than him. Because when he is, he elevates the space around him. From the football field to the city, to the game of football itself, Travis Hunter is who we've been hunting up. Couldn't be more jacked to be sitting right here beside him and introduce you all to the man of the hour.
The sport of football. The power of football. Man, I've watched that 100 times. All right, Diante, we actually take people behind the scenes. You just heard that, watched that for the first time. You hadn't seen it before the show. You played football at a high level. You coach high school football. If there's anyone who's going to be feeling this in their bones on this podcast, I feel like it would be you, but I also know you like to laugh at the NFL sometimes too. So what was your reaction to hearing that clip from James Gladstone?
I love when people in sports speak like they can hear the movie score behind them. So that's number one. As he's talking, you can see him almost like looking into the lights from the cameras and stuff that are pointing in his direction. Like this was clearly rehearsed. He clearly has a very high opinion of what this speech was supposed to deliver. I think he was definitely looking for the standing ovation moment. I love the big, haughty, over the top, comparisons and analogies made. We talk about the sport and the capacity to inspire belief, and we're changing boundaries and what he's going to mean to the city of Jacksonville and all that. I loved it. 10 out of 10 as a piece of performance art. Also, didn't know that a guy that looked like that thought that highly of his own opinion, like his abilities as an orator, right? Like I would have never thought that he would have some big grandiose opening statement in a press conference. So all in all, I'm giving this a solid A- as a piece of performance. And now if you're Travis Hunter, you've got to feel like you're on top of the world, right? What better statement to get introduced to your city after being drafted than hearing how highly this GM thinks of you?
Yeah. Let me just say one thing. He beat the Solak allegations. I'll say that. But I must be a sucker.
Do you want to clarify, or do we just leave it at that?
No, I don't. I'll let Ben fill in the gaps there. No, but I'm falling for it. I'm a sucker. I'm probably a sucker. I fell for Brandon Staley. I'm falling for this guy again. I love it. I love when football people talk about the sport in this way, because it should be talked about in this way. It deserves to be talked about in this way. It's a great sport. And I agree with what he's saying. Like, this is a pick that could push the boundaries of how we think about players and positional value and all that stuff. I hope that Travis Hunter plays full-time on both sides. I know it's not realistic or probably physically possible, but it's a cool moment. And I like that he's like reveling in it.
I guess I'm naturally a little bit. I agree that I for Travis Hunter, I hope is the greatest, most exciting player we've ever seen. And it's the possibility, we talked about that on Thursday night. The possibility is there that he's the coolest player in the NFL and maybe the coolest player we've ever seen. I absolutely hope that happens. I'm like afraid to, I don't want to just like make fun of the guy because I'm nervous that he's going to win like 4 Super Bowls. And then I'm going to be like, man, I missed it on that. We don't judge people based on press conferences. Who knows how he is behind the scenes. I just like having him as a new character in my life that, wow, I'm with you guys. I didn't know he was capable of this. And I will say this, if he flames out in 2 years, we will just look back at this as the moment we knew that, all right, we should have seen something coming there. It doesn't mean he's going to. I wish him, I don't know. He seems like a nice guy. I don't know much about him personally other than what I've read and what I've seen. But man, the guy comes out firing. He makes the trade. He delivers this speech. Ruiz, do you agree with Diante? Was this definitely rehearsed? Did he run this by anybody? Or is this a man just speaking from his heart, speaking with passion, impromptu?
I think it was rehearsed. He definitely looked in the mirror at least once or twice and did the spiel. I almost expected him midway through to like look to the side and be like, line, and it never happened. But it was good. He nailed it. Give him an Oscar if this is a prepared performance.
If Travis Hunter ends up being the player that we believe he can be, you just got the foreword of your biography. Those words are 100% what needs to be in the foreword of the book.
He has to introduce him.
Right about Travis.
He has to introduce him in Ken. He has to be the guy.
I was just
going
to say that has Hall of Fame speech written all over it. He could just run this back.
Now, I want Travis Hunter to succeed. I think he's going to succeed. I think he's a great football player, and it'll be very fun if he does. But now the funniest outcome is that he's like one of the biggest busts of all time.
Well, here's the thing, and I wrote this in my column today as I was thinking about this more. I don't trust the Jaguars with this experiment is where I've like, maybe they'll get it right. And I hope they prove me wrong, but it's just like, this has been a train wreck of an organization since Shad Khan bought the team. I mean, they've literally won fewer games than any other franchise since Shad Khan bought the team. This was an organization that thought Urban Meyer was a good idea. This was an organization that couldn't get rid of Trent Baalke until Liam Cohen forced their hands. Like, so now they've got to come up with a plan to do something that hasn't been done in the NFL in 60 years for this prospect. Like, listen, Travis Hunter's agent, family, just don't be afraid to intervene a little bit with, I don't think that's a good idea. No, my guy's not doing that. Let's think of something else, because I just don't know that I trust them to come up with a plan for him to play both ways and to keep him as healthy as possible and to make him have a long lasting career and to make him have a high impact on both sides of the ball. I hope I'm wrong. I hope end of next year, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, I say I was wrong. Those guys knew what they were doing. It's a new day in Jacksonville, but I'm definitely in need to see it to believe it mode with the Jaguars. But man, just send me all the James Gladstone clips, man. He had another one, they're carrying a football around. He said it's a bridge. It's like a fidget spinner. If you come from a football family, if you come from the world of sport, throwing a ball is where you feel good. I'm like, man,
I agree with him.
Watch anything about this guy right now. Unbelievable. He has my attention.
Who doesn't love to throw a football back and forth? But
any type of ball.
I'll say this, beyond the speech, I loved his approach to the draft. One, they came into the draft with an obvious need at edge rusher. Don't reach for one. He says after the draft, hey, we didn't want to reach for one. It's how the board fell. We didn't feel comfortable doing that, but we're going to look into it. Next day, Emmanuel Ogbah's on the team. I think that common sense approach to GMing is something that's been lacking in Jacksonville. To your point, this has been one of the worst run organizations going back to the beginning of the Shad Khan era, going back to Gus Bradley. You talked about Urban Meyer. Gus Bradley's one of the worst head coaches of all time and got to stick around for 4 years.
That's the good guy, the old good guy theory, Ruiz. If you are a nice person who the owner likes to hang out with, you can extend your career. I don't know why more coaches and GMs don't understand that, but yeah, that should be renamed the Gus Bradley theory.
Imagine if Urban Meyer was a good dude, he might have been able to pull off his script for 3 years. But I will say this, I don't think holding an organization's past mistakes, especially when they're just owner based and bad hires, is necessarily the right way. Because you could look at the 49ers around the same time. Before Kyle Shanahan came. Jed York was considered one of the worst owners in the league. He had Trent Baalke stick around for way longer than anyone would have expected. He thought Jim Tom Sula was a good decision. And then now they're one of the best run organizations in the NFL and competing for Super Bowls seemingly every year. And then another thing, I like I said earlier, I don't think it's physically possible to do what Travis Hunter wants to do. But some of these guys are just different. Adrian Peterson was different. Derrick Henry looks like he's different.
That's
and
the
I think
fun of
Travis
sports.
Hunter could be different.
Yeah, you're right. That's the fun of sports. It's been like you said,
The boundaries.
challenge the boundaries.
Yes.
Love it.
Inspire belief.
I'm just warning you, man. I'm going to break into James Gladstone like once a show for at least the next 6 months. So, get ready for it. You will be annoyed by it very quickly. I'm talking to Diante. I'm talking to Ruiz. I'm talking to you, the audience, but I'm sorry. It's happening. Sometimes you got to do something for yourself.
Okay, how about this? How about this? If they win the AFC South, you have to do a whole episode of James Gladstone.
100%. I'll do a YouTube video. I'll do it. Wait, what did you say? If they make the playoffs or win the Super Bowl?
No, they win the AFC South.
Oh, win the AFC
Let's not get
South.
crazy. Let's not.
All right.
Right, yeah.
Well,
we can temper expectations on that one.
they got a chance to. Yeah, they absolutely have a chance to win the AFC South. That division, they've got a chance. And you're right. Sometimes a new voice, whether it's a GM or a coach or a quarterback, can make a franchise that was not thought of highly, look totally different. So maybe that is what will happen here. So thank you to James Gladstone. You will be good for content. I know that already after just your first draft. All right. Last one to get to here. I had to read up on this because I'll be honest, I ignored like every headline tweet about this. I'm like, I don't really need more information on this. But then I thought, all right, we should probably cover this on the podcast. The prank call, the infamous prank call to Shadeur Sanders. So if you missed it, Shadeur Sanders received a prank call with someone pretending to be Mickey Loomis, the New Orleans Saints GM, telling him he was going to be drafted. Obviously, that did not happen. So in a weird twist, the person making the prank call was the son of the Atlanta Falcons defensive coordinator, Jeff Ulbrich, the interim coach of the Jets last year, now the Falcons defensive coordinator. His son was responsible for the prank call to Shadeur Sanders. Now, when we say his son, he is 21 years old. This isn't like a 9-year-old who did this. This is a 21-year-old adult who got the number from dad's iPad because this wasn't, I believe, just Shadeur Sanders' regular cell phone. I think it was an NFL issued something. Listen, I'm like I told you. I tried to get the basics of the story. I don't have every detail down. These guys can fill in the details, but he made the prank call. And so the Atlanta Falcons had to apologize. His son, Jax Ulbrich, had to apologize on Instagram as well. Ruiz, I see you giggling over there. So let's start with you.
First, I saw the Atlanta Falcons apology pop up on Twitter. I thought it was for the James Pierce trade at first.
Yeah, I need an apology for that. If you're a Falcons fan, go demand an apology for that. Much more egregious than anything that Jax Ulbrich did.
No, this is horrible. This is cruel, awful. With that said, can we make jokes about it? We can establish that it was
I think
bad.
so. Yeah.
Okay. First of all, Jax, like the name Jax, I feel like Ulbrich set his son up to be this guy, which is
not
a red
just
flag.
Jax at Ole Miss. I feel like we're creating a specific kind of profile.
Is that a red flag for the Giants? They just drafted a Jax from Ole Miss to be their franchise quarterback.
Well, yeah, I didn't even put together that Jax is short for Jackson.
The thing I take issue with the apology is that it was done unintentionally. When there was a script, like the video, you could see the guy reading the script. Maybe James Gladstone wrote the script for him, but it was. I don't know how this happens. I don't know how and they're not going to punish Jeff Ulbrich in any way. I feel like you have to almost. I know he didn't do it, but like he allowed it to happen.
He left his iPad open or whatever.
So,
to the thing with the phone numbers on it.
But I know this doesn't matter for the Falcons on the football field, but I think it just speaks to the incompetence throughout that organization right now. I just if you're a Falcons fan, how do you come away from this weekend feeling any type of optimism about the team?
I like your theory before, Ruiz. Maybe Terry Fontenot put Jax Ulbrich onto this. He said, I'm getting killed by the Ringer NFL show and other people for this trade. We need a distraction. You need some money, maybe some beer money for this weekend or whatever. Here's $500. Do me a favor. Here, call this number and do a little prank call. We're going to leak it next week. Don't worry. It won't be on your permanent record. You're going to be okay. And we can get the stories about my trade for to give up a 2026 first out of the headlines. What do you think, Diante?
I would just say, on one hand, when I saw the news first come across, I was like, oh, okay. To Steven's point, you want to talk about the person who can own the URL of Draft Dickhead. This can definitely go to Jax Ulbrich for this behavior. And then like almost instantly, because social media is just so good for this. We get into the performative Olympics of what the punishment should be. And that was exactly when I signed off. Like as the details are coming in, you start to see all the takes about just like how terrible and awful a thing it is. And it does suck. Like, don't get me wrong. The emotional manipulation that Shadeur had to have been experiencing, especially given the way the rest of his draft weekend ended up playing out, I can't imagine that felt very good. Like, and I am empathetic for what he experienced, but focusing solely on the Ulbrich family, I don't think that Jeff Ulbrich should be fired. I do think that there needs to be some sort of internal punishment, though, because that is a major breakdown in info security, right? And if this was a playbook that ended up posted on Twitter, then Jeff Ulbrich probably does lose his job for that. Right? Like if this was a draft board, Jeff Ulbrich might have lost his job for this. And you can't guarantee what you put at risk by leaving your iPad open, even if you are with trusted family members. But outside of that, man, like, I just don't care. Yeah. I just don't care. He's not the only guy to have been prank called. That doesn't make it okay. But like, come on, man.
Imagine Tyler Warren. You talked about the emotional manipulation. He was almost led to believe he was going to the Jets. That's
right. A
worse.
top 10 pick. And he's literally at he's in the green room, if I remember right. Like there are guys in the green room, according to Kevin Stefanski, who have been receiving prank calls as well. So like imagine walking down the hallway or getting prepared to walk down the hallway. You got the cameras everywhere, and then it turns out that you're not the pick. So that definitely is not good. I'm just like, can we just put this to bed now? We got the apology. We got the half-hearted apology from a college kid, which I expect no less than from a college kid who has the capacity to make a dumb decision like this. And let's bury it. Falcons, fine them, right? Fine them internally. Make them take like, an unpaid leave or whatever for this InfoSec breakdown. The NFL put out their statement. We can be done with this. It can all be done.
I like it. I will say one thing. Like, this isn't Shadeur's fault at all. But Mickey Loomis, how did you think that this kid from Ole Miss sounded like Mickey Loomis would sound like? You know what I'm saying?
Who knows? I didn't hear it. Have you heard? I didn't hear it. Did you?
He was just talking normally, like a 21-year-old kid. And you
what do you know? I don't know what Mickey Loomis sounds like.
But you could imagine what Mickey Loomis sounds like. I mean, the guy. Think about his cap situation. You know what he sounds like.
I hate that I'm like imagining this very grovelly voice. I've never heard Mickey Loomis speak.
Exactly. A grovelly Southern voice is what you're expecting.
Actually, no. I think Mickey Loomis, I think I have heard him talk before, and it was a surprising voice. I actually think it's higher than you would expect. Now we have to do some research on this. We're going to hear from people about this. But no, I actually think Mickey Loomis's voice is not what you would actually think Mickey Loomis would sound like. So
let's do like a voice lineup like they do like when they're like
next
identifying,
show. Yeah,
like,
we got content to fill, Ruiz.
Okay.
So I love that idea.
Give me like 5 different voices, and I have to pick out Mickey Loomis.
I like it. That sounds like a segment on a future episode. So we will do that. But I'm with Diante. Someone tell him, grow up, you little draftdickhead.com, and then let's all move on. We don't need anything more about this story. So now I should just close the loop. Tyler Warren did receive a prank call, like you guys said, per ESPN Stephen Holder. And that was not from Jack Ulbrich. So maybe there's somebody else's, son out there who's doing the same thing. Yeah, I don't know. We don't know who did that one, but there was a prank call to him. And Bill's 6th round pick, Chase Lunt, said he received about 4 or 5 prank calls. So there you go. Mysteries unsolved. All right.
I just want to say before you sign off.
Yeah, please.
This is a multi-billion-dollar industry, NFL. Yeah. Can you find a way to do this with more secure communications?
Yeah.
Where this stuff isn't happening? Like, there has to be a more efficient way to get this information across to the players. I understand that the phone calls make for great social media content now because you can get the recorded line, but there's got to be a more efficient, streamlined way to do this.
Or do they like that, this is in the headlines of maybe more so than maybe some more serious stuff? Who knows? Roger Goodell works in mysterious ways, and we have, we are not paid by so we can say whatever we want about Roger Goodell. So I'm sure they don't mind that there's a headline. Who cares? You know what?
You saying Roger's behind the Tyler Warren call?
Maybe he's like distract everyone. We just implemented a rule for more kickoff returns that are going to lead to more concussions. I'd rather have him talking about prank calls to the draft prospects than that. There's all sorts of stuff going on. So who knows? I would never put it past the NFL. All right. That was a baseless accusation just for the record. But You know what? You got to say whatever comes to mind. All right. Thank you to Diante Lee. Thank you to Stephen Ruiz. We're a little loopy. It's okay. We will be back later this week. We're going to talk about some veterans who are still out there or are available. And let's figure out some of these unanswered questions for the rest of the offseason. What might happen with some of those players? So we'll do that later this week. All right. Thanks to Diante and Ruiz. Thank you to Christopher Sutton for producing. Thank you to Kiera Givens on social. I'm Sheil Kapadia. We'll talk to you next time on the Ringer NFL Show. Must be 21 plus and present in select states. For Kansas, in affiliation with Kansas Star Casino, or 18 plus and present in D.C. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit rg-help.com. Call 1-888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org/chat in Connecticut or visit mdgamblinghelp.org in Maryland. Hope is here. Visit gamblinghelplinema.org or call 800-327-5050 for 24/7 support in Massachusetts or call 1-877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY in New York.